welcome to Amy's Book Nook. This is the channel where I get to chat to you about books. You might notice that the nook looks a little bit different. That's because I moved recently. I'm still getting settled in, so please forgive the mess. Hopefully it will be tidy soon. But I haven't been on in a while and I wanted to do another video. It feels a bit redundant to say that things are totally crazy man, but you know, they are really wild right now, and I've been off and on furlough a couple of different times, but one of the lifelines for me over this time has been the Dystopian Fiction Book Club that I've facilitated through the Waterstones Cambridge book shop, and it's been really helpful to connect with people, and I think other people are enjoying it, and I just thought I'd tell you a little bit about how it got started. It was originally when we were going to discuss, when Margaret Atwood's The Testaments was coming out, and as a shop we were just thinking, what can we do to really celebrate this book and get people excited about it? And so I decided to do a mini lecture series stroke discussion group on dystopian fiction. So we looked at 1984, and then Brave New World, and then The Handmaid's Tale, and then we read The Testaments. So we met once a month, and this was sort of the run-up to The Testaments. And it was really great. It was so much fun, and there's some of the folks wanted to sort of keep going. So instead of doing it as the lecture series stroke discussion group, we morphed it into a book club and have continued on. And again, it's been a lot of fun, and I want people to feel like they can participate even if in that book club, even if they haven't attended those previous sort of mini lecture series. So my goal for now is to put up videos, which I'm gonna essentially be reframing my notes from that mini lecture series so that people can follow along. Anyway, I should say a little bit about myself, that I did a PhD in contemporary women's fiction. I have taught, I worked as an associate lecturer and taught on English literature modules as well as critical theory modules, and I've done some work on dystopia. I have one published article on Utopia in the Enlightenment era, but primarily my work is on contemporary women writers. And you'll see as we go along my particular interest in contemporary women writers. I try to make sure that I put those, you know, canonical texts, dystopian and utopian text into the mix, but I do tend to skew myself toward contemporary women writers, so bear that in mind as we go along. I don't think I should need to apologize for it, but I just thought you should know. So if you're interested in utopian fiction, where do you start? Well, the very short introduction series put out by Oxford University Press is a phenomenal series, and they always choose fantastic people to put the piece together, and the one that they've done on utopianism is no exception. It's put together by, I'm going to say his name wrong, Lehman Tower Sargent. He is the guy for utopianism and dystopian fiction. Well, dystopianism in general, historical approaches and things like that. And it's just a fantastic, concise edition that doesn't overlook any of the major issues. So that's a really great place to start. Another great place to start is Marlon Coverley's Utopia. And if I'm honest, his structure of how he introduces texts is something I've essentially nicked, because he does such a great job introducing and thinking chronologically about how the idea of utopia has changed. And now, if you have a real academic interest in utopia, this chunker is the way to go. Huge volume on utopia, and really heavily researched and heavily historically rooted. So if you're a history buff and you're really into that, this utopia is the one for you. It might be hard to get a hold of. I don't know if it's still in print, but feel free to ping me a message and I'll send you the details. So utopia. Where does one start when you talk about utopia? Essentially, the term utopia was coined by Sir Thomas More in 1516. He wrote Utopia originally in Latin, and the name Utopia is a pun. It's based on two Greek words. Let me see if I can say this properly. I'm going to just check my notes here. It's U-O-U-T, Utopia, which means no place, and E-U-T, Utopia, meaning good place. So it's a great place, but it doesn't exist, is essentially the pun of utopia. When considering the opposite of utopia, there have been a few different terms used. An English philosopher named Jeremy Bentham in 1818 used the CACO, caco, which means bad. So cacotopia, which sounds hilarious to me. But it's where the phrase, the cacao meaning bad, is where we get the phrase cack-handed. So, I mean, it's just to my modern sensibilities that I think cacotopia is not the kind of discussion I want to be having right now. The term was superseded not too much later, but as dystopia by by John Stuart Mill in 1868. More recently, so like in the 1960s, people have used the phrase anti-utopia, but I prefer dystopia. I think it's somehow resonates. I don't know, it's lasted a long time. It's my preferred term. If you do scholarly or academic searches, you definitely want to use the term anti-utopia, as some of the times the discourse uses that language as well. So it's worth keeping in mind. But even though the term itself emerged in the 1500s, the concept is not new. There's the idea of a sort of an idyllic place it recurs in literature and history. So and this is thought of as what's considered the golden age. So think the city of Atlantis in Plato's The Republic. Think about the Epic of Gilgamesh. I think that, what was that garden called? Dilmun, I think. And Garden of Eden in the Book of Genesis, described as a paradise, as this perfect place that exists, but it exists in the past. So in each of these sort of golden age scenarios, utopia already existed. There was this perfect place, and it existed in the past. There's also ideas of utopia being located in the future. Think particularly the afterlife. Think of City of God by St. Augustine. And Plato's Republic is pursuing a utopia, and it is a utopia that doesn't necessarily come after death. It comes on this earth, but it is through work and change. In Plato's ideal society, people are given work based on their talents. It's considered managerial mediocrity, or mediocrity, sorry, Freudian slip. I think it's not too surprising that for Plato, the ruler of this utopia is a philosopher, the philosopher ruler. I think some of the things that we should not forget about the Republic is there are still slaves, breeding is controlled, weakness and deformity are not tolerated, and it's this idea of human perfectibility, or sort of the perfectibility of human nature through philosophy, which I sort of can't get behind personally. And I think it's at this junction it's worth thinking of who is utopia for? So this is clearly a utopian idea for Plato as a philosopher, being led by a philosopher. I mean, he doesn't say it would be him. He doesn't name anyone. But it should be a philosopher ruler. So that's this sort of golden age of utopianism. In the later modern eras, we work toward literary utopias. So literary utopias in the early modern era are not based on temporal distance, so they're not necessarily in the past or in the future, but spatial or geographic distance. So it's in the context of discovery, and often one of the primary tropes is having a traveler meeting another traveler who found a new society, and it's in contrast to contemporary the author's contemporary historical and social context. So, for example, Sir Thomas More's Utopia, More meets a fictional sailor, and they have a dialogue about 16th century England, and then that sailor tells him about an island that he came across. The writer, I'm going to say it wrong because my Spanish is miserable, Tommaso Campanella did City of the Sun. It was completed in 1602, but not published until 1623. And again, we have an unnamed sailor, but a sailor again, and he tells of a journey to the Indian Ocean, where he discovers a city. And then again, we have Sir Francis Bacon, New Atlantis, came out in 1620s, again uses that trope of the traveler. So utopia is possible, and it's now, but it's not here, it's somewhere else. In the 18th century, these sort of travel narratives give way to satire. So you have Robinson Crusoe, and you have Gulliver's Travels, and even Samuel Johnson's Rasalias can sort of be considered a satire on this travel narrative of finding this perfect place. In the 19th century, we see a shift toward revolution. So the works of Marx and Hegel tried to explain instability and find logical solutions. So for Marx, obviously, it was means of production and an economic disparity, and the way to fix this is through reason and progress. And so in the 19th century, utopia became no longer the end of a journey on a ship, but the result of discourse, so social and political discourse, something we need to move toward and take action toward. In the 20th century, progress was no longer this pleasant and inevitable result of science and discourse. Rather, utopia could only be brought about through violence. And this is a quote from Scheer, from this guy, says, by subverting the past and destroying the old tenacious ways. This is why the absolute faith in the historical necessity of a radiant future always had to go hand in hand with the most radical political volunteerism from which it drew its strength. The Soviet Union of the 1920s and 1930s was the very embodiment of this. So one of the things that Scheer highlights for us is that in the early 20th century, people are trying for these social experiments, and they are including violence, and we certainly see that through the history of the 1900s. But there hasn't been a lack of pursuit of the ideal society, and I think right now, with all the things that that which is unsettling for me with being originally from the US and what's happening with the politics there, this question of what can an ideal society look like, and certainly inequality in how justice is served and laws are enforced is going to be a part of that. But I think of all of these societies, all these ideal societies in discussion of utopia and dystopia, is the question you have to answer is, who is involved and how it functions. So how do, not just how do we get there, but how does this work? How does the ideal society work? And that is going to be answered differently in different historical contexts. And it's also worth thinking, so what do we actually need? You know, you need food, you need shelter, you need clothing, relationships. There has to be a way to procreate or the society will die. And there's going to be labor or work of some kind, most likely. Now, again, in the Golden Era, the labor was minimal because the land was so fruitful. So, you know, Adam and Eve were able to eat from anything in the garden, you know, except for the one tree. And it wasn't until what is considered the fall of humanity that they are sort of expelled and have this hard labor of farming. So the idea that the perfect place is plentiful and there's minimal labor is in some of these sort of, particularly the Golden Age narratives. Margaret Atwood recently, well, not historically recently, wrote an introduction to Huxley's Brave New World, and she gives a fantastic discussion of Utopia and Dystopia in her introduction. And she pits these same questions but a little differently, and I think it's really worth hearing her questions. She says, where do people live? What do they eat? What do they wear? What do they do about sex and child rearing? Who has the power? Who does the work? How do citizens relate to nature? And how does the economy function? So as we think about dystopia, I think those are the questions we need to think about. How people procreate is very different in 1984 than it is in Brave New World, than it is in Handmaid's Tale. But thinking about how those questions are answered sort of, I think, exposes the architecture, the sort of the form or framework of how these societies function. So there's just a little bit about dystopia and utopia, the opposite of. I will add a few videos after this, working specifically or thinking through specific novels. But I hope this introduction helps give you some hooks to put ideas on as we continue on. So have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you later. Thanks, bye.